Hey, shalom, guys, and welcome to Wisdom and Torah Ministries. I was just sitting here doing some research and studying on a very interesting topic that I've been looking into on the last few months, and also reading Dina Dai's book. It's called The Temple Revealed in the Garden. Amazing book. I highly recommend you get it. And I'm also reading the book by The Tabernacle Prefigured by Morales. I'm also reading Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord by Morales. Amazing books. And a few other ones that I'm reading on the topic, and also an article by Gordon Wenham in regards to the tabernacle and creation. What I want to do tonight is just share with you a few things that I'm learning, some of the things that I kind of want to pick your interest in regards to some things that I'm researching that will be pretty soon. We're going to put it on our website, wisdomandtorah.com. And before that, I want to just take the time to share some of the stuff that I'm finding out with you. You know, in my research over the last 20 years of the temple, I have been really intrigued, and I'm very much researching a lot about the function of the priesthood, the function of the temple, the importance of understanding the architecture, understanding the roles of the priesthood, the feasts, the sacrificial system, the offerings, and everything like that. And you know, as I am researching this, I've been looking into new creation. In the last 2 years, I've been looking into new creation and the purpose of what is the function of Adam? What was the function of humanity? What are we supposed to do in the gospel? How are we to understand what we're learning from the temple? Why is the temple so important? Everybody asks me that all the time. It seems like no one wants to study that. You know, they want to eliminate the temple, the priesthood, and all that stuff. But instead of arguing about that, I want to submit to you some of the things that I'm learning here in regards to the tabernacle and also the book of Genesis, chapters 1 and 2. And, you know, as I was studying the book of Morales, I've been researching this for so long. It was Joseph Good who actually mentioned something to me. He goes, he told me, Rico, did you know that the tabernacle in the wilderness has some parallels with Genesis chapters 1 and 2? And I already understood that, so I wasn't really researching it because it's more for my own personal study. But as I continue to do this and look into this, I realized the importance of understanding Genesis chapters 1 and 2 as a primordial creation. In other words, like the earth's original intention. The earth's original intention. The Creator wanted to make the earth a temple so that he can Emmanuel, so that he can dwell with Israel. And that's something that is very significant, because throughout Scripture, the narrative, it always tells us how the Creator, Hashem, the Lord God, he wants to dwell with Israel constantly. So when you look into chapters 1 and 2 and you parallel that with chapters 35 and chapters 40 of the book of Exodus, it's like having a bookends. You have chapters 1 of Genesis and chapters 2, and we're going to parallel some of the verses to chapters 35 to 40 of the book of Exodus. It's like bookends. You have to put it together. Now, the two books have one thing in common, that in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, it is the desire of God to dwell among men. And in the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus, chapters 40, the tabernacle is not really a tabernacle until the presence of God dwells in the tabernacle. That's the difference between a house and a home. Okay? A house and a home. A house is the structure. Okay? The garden became a house. So like the book by Dina Dai, she introduces this principle that is extremely important when she talks about it. Where is it? Right here. She talks about it in her book, and I highly recommend you buy it. Please go to her website. It's Foundations in Torah, and get this book, because we've been studying the same things for a while, and she makes some really cool connections here, and we see these parallels all throughout. But I'm going to read from her book in verse page 7. She goes, the psalmist creation account describes the construction of the cosmic temple using architectural terms, laying the beams, stretching out the tent, erecting the curtain, sinking the pillars in the earth, setting the cornerstone, like in Psalms 104. So it's using creation as an architecture. But in chapters 2, the Creator is introducing Adam as a gardener. Now we got to go into the agricultural aspect of it. He prepares a garden, and in the garden he prepares Adam, or Adam, humanity, in order for one purpose: to guard the garden, to keep the garden. It's interesting that the word there is avodah, to keep and guard it. Shomer is to guard, okay, and to keep it, to work it. Avodah. I find it so interesting that the same name for the service of the priest in the temple is avodah. That's the work they do. What's interesting is that you and I, we are doing exactly the same thing. We are now in Messiah, Yeshua, and now you and I, we are trying to follow the commandments, guard the commandments, and then we are to sow the seed of the word to those people in the world, in the nations, as the representatives of God on the earth. We are the ambassadors. So in fact, you and I, we are becoming gardeners for the kingdom. He restores us. He makes us a new creation. He bestows garments of honor. He gives us a new name. For what purpose? For what function? So that we can become his gardeners, just like Adam. And just like Yeshua, when he resurrected, one of the ladies who went to the garden tomb, when she thought he was a gardener. So therefore, the duty of humanity is to be the ambassadors, the stewards of God on the earth, for the purpose that humanity will raise a great name for God, so that his name will be renowned, so that his name will be exalted. Our job is so that the name of God, and I'm not talking about the pronunciation alone, I'm talking about the actions, our honor, integrity, character, righteousness, justice, through our testimony in our obedience and loyalty to the covenant, by observing the Torah, guarding the Torah, and then we sow the seed of righteousness. We sow the seed of the word. So we are doing the same thing Adam did. We have been restored. We have been given honor to do that. So now the work in verse in page 8 says this. It says the work of creation was described as very good, which means that it was fully functional. In Genesis 2 and 3, the language shifts from architectural to agriculture. That is, the substance and maintenance of creation. This change in focus required to a different kind of work. Now, the responsibility of the human, Adam, who was placed in the garden, mankind, was to serve as a royal priesthood, a kingdom of priests, because the priesthood are benefactor. The priest would intercede. The priest would mediate. The priest would facilitate the words from men to God and from God to men. Okay? So this is a function that we need to consider here. So what's interesting is Corinthians chapters 3, verse 9 to 11. It says, for we are God's co-workers. You are God's field, God's building, according to the grace of God, who was given to men like a skilled master builder. I laid a foundation, and another builds on it. But let each consider carefully how he builds on it. For no one can lay any other foundation than what is already laid, which is Yeshua, the Messiah. So Yeshua is the foundation, the chief cornerstone, and he is the last Adam. So now we become his stewards. Okay, so now let me give you some more comparisons between chapters 39 and 40 of the book of Exodus and Genesis 1 and 2. So are you with me? So we're going to do this together. So we're going to make some connections, okay? The bookends, remember? We're going to compare the book of Exodus with Genesis 1 and 2, try to make a connection of the function of creation, how chapters 2 starts with the Sabbath. And it's interesting because in the book by Morales, he makes a very interesting statement. He says, Sabbath was last in creation, but it was first in intention. the whole essence of God's creation in the book of Genesis was to give men a position of honor. And it's interesting because the ancient world believed that the gods created humanity for the purpose of slavery. That's what they believe. That's the mythology. When you look at the ancient creation myth, the gods got tired of providing for their own needs, so now they need a workforce. So they created humanity, according to the myth in the ancient world, for the purpose of just serving the needs of the gods. And that's why they used to bring sacrifices to the gods so that they could eat. Well, the Torah make a complete separation from that. The Torah tells us that God created humanity in the image of God. He created. For what purpose? To have dominion over the earth, to have dominion over everything created. In other words, we are supposed to be stewards of God's creation. We are supposed to be the image of God. Okay, we're supposed to represent him in character, in honor, in integrity, in righteousness, in justice, in fidelity, in loyalty, in covenantal relationship. So what we have here is in the book of Exodus, chapters 35, what does it start with? It starts with the Sabbath. You shall keep the Sabbath. Why? Because the Sabbath was the highlight of creation. The Sabbath became the icing on the cake, per se, of the function God gave to the earth. The Sabbath became the day when the Creator raises the level of honor of Adam, makes him holy, so that he can partake in God's holy space, which is the Sabbath, holy sacred space. The Sabbath becomes the enthronement ceremony, just like Exodus chapters 35, 36 to 40 will becomes the construction of the tabernacle. And then there's the enthronement ceremony. And then you have the presence of God fall on the tabernacle. And then you have the presence of God dwelling with men in the garden. The same parallels. Okay? All right, so now let's compare this. In Exodus chapters 39, verse 43, are you ready for this? It says, and Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it. Okay? And in Genesis chapters 1, verse 31 says, and God saw that all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. In other words, this is what I'm trying to connect here. That in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, chapters 1 is God doing the work of architecture, giving function to the earth, bringing order from chaos. In the book of Exodus, chapters 35 into chapters 40, you're going to see the same pattern. You're going to see Moses becoming the image of God on the earth, becoming the architect of the tabernacle. The Lord gives them the blueprint. He becomes the construction manager. Okay, and the Creator gives wisdom to two of the people in the tribes of Israel, so they can do the work. So what we have is that now you have the same pattern. God is the creative process of the architecture of the earth, bringing function to the earth and bringing order from chaos. And then we come in the Exodus experience. You have Moses becoming the architect and teaching Israel to build the tabernacle. Remember, humanity building the temple of the Lord, right, as architect. And then in chapters 2 of the book of Genesis, you see that he rests on the seventh day. The Lord rests. That means that he is ruling and reigning from his temple. That means that Jerusalem, or Eden, is the most holy place on the earth, which is in fact the Holy of Holies in the temple. So what we have here is our parallels. Now remember, in the book of Genesis, you have the presence of God dwelling with Adam. You see? And then you have the presence of God falling on the tabernacle and dwelling in the temple amongst all of Israel. But in order for Israel to be able to dwell in the presence of God, in this case, in order for the Lord to dwell amongst Israel, Israel needed to be raised up in the level of honor. They were made a holy nation. As a holy nation, their level of status was raises up from chaos and disorder and oppression in Egypt to like holiness, approaching God. They are now dwelling in the presence of the Creator by the cloud. Okay, so what we have is the same pattern in humanity. Okay, when you go back to Genesis, you see Adam in chapters 1 verse 26. He is created, but it's not into chapters 2, okay, men and women are created, humanity is created, but chapters 2, then he breathed on Adam and he became a living soul. So Adam was just a house. But when the Spirit of God breathed on Adam, he became a home for the presence of God to dwell within him. In creation, the Lord created a house, but it wasn't really a temple to him or home until he dwelled with men on the earth. In the tabernacle, it was a mishkan, but it did not become a mikdash until the presence of God dwelled in the tabernacle. So in fact, the tabernacle became a home. And that's why the temple is called the Beit HaMikdash, the house of the presence. Okay? It's not just a structure. It becomes alive because the presence of God dwells within it. We become alive when the presence of the Lord is within us, when he seals us with his Spirit, when he breathes on us his Spirit, he brings us into everlasting life. Before that, we were just a body with imminent death. In Messiah, the Father now has given us the breath of life and promised us eternity to take us back to Eden, to take us back to the garden. Aren't you excited? This is very important. So, in Exodus chapters 39, verse 43, in Genesis chapters 1, verse 31, there's a connection and a parallel. In Exodus 39, verse 32 says, thus was completed all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. In Genesis chapters 1, verse 2 says, the heavens and the earth were completed and all their array. And in Exodus 40, verse 33 says, Moses had finished the work. When Moses had finished the work, in Exodus 40, 33. And in Genesis chapters 2, verse 2 says, God finished the work that he had been doing. And then in Exodus 39, 43 says, Moses blessed them. And then in Genesis chapters 2, verse 3 says, and God blessed, the day and made it holy. In Exodus chapters 40, verse 9, it says, to sanctify it in all its furnishings. And then in chapters 2, in the chapters 2 of the book of Genesis, verse 3 says, and he sanctified and made Sabbath holy. So we see a lot of the parallels here that are important for us to understand. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. When you study the temple, then you'll really understand the importance of sacred spaces. You will understand the importance of understanding creation. You see, what is the message of the temple? The overall theme and message of the temple. The message of the temple is to show you and I that the Creator still has a desire for him to dwell and Emmanuel amongst men. That is the message of the temple in a nutshell. The whole idea is for humanity to understand that even though we are in our fallen state, that we have fallen short of the glory of the Lord, he still has found a way to allow us access to him. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, the high priest once a year will go into the Holy of Holies. He will wear white. Why would he wear white? Because wearing white was a representation and a metaphor for the holy status of Adam. See, Adam, even the rabbis say that Adam's flesh was light. Okay, I'm paraphrasing. They use another language, but they're saying that Adam's flesh was light, that when he sinned, he lost that radiance. It's interesting that when Moses goes to the mountaintop and he sees the back of the Lord, not the whole full face, the back of the Lord, when he comes down from the mountain on a Yom Kippur, by the way, on a Yom HaKippurim, Moses' face shines because he was in the presence of God. What's interesting is that now the priests are chosen to be a representation of the perfect state of Adam. That's why the requirements for the priesthood was so strict. The high priest requirement for the high priesthood was extremely, very much strict about the requirements for high priest. Why? Because the high priest was a typology of Adam. That means that on Yom Kippur, the Lord still gave access to a human to come into his holy place, to Eden. Remember that the garden was protected by the cherubims. In the ancient Near East, we know that holy spaces, sacred spaces, was protected by cherubims or lions, or any kind of form. In Solomon's temple, as well as in the Ark of the Covenant, you have cherubims protecting the Ark of the Covenant. And during the time of Solomon, we saw that it tells us there were huge cherubims that were huge in the temple, in the Holy Holies. Why is that? Because the Lord put there, in the story of Genesis, the cherubims with flaming swords protecting the way to the tree of life. The veil renting, not on the Holy Holies, but the veil renting on the holy place, is a symbolic picture of that through Yeshua, the light of the world, and Yeshua, the Messiah, now we have access to eat of the tree of life. That is the Torah. The Torah is the tree of life. Every Shabbat on the liturgy of the Shabbat, we always sing Etaim Chi. In other words, the Torah, we raise it up and we say, this is the Torah of Moses. It is a life to those who get a hold of it. So the Torah becomes the life, becomes the tree of life that he's given us. It's interesting that in the book of Genesis, the Lord tells Adam and Eve, there are two trees. Eat of that one, you live. Don't eat of that one. He gave them to choose. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 30, when Israel is renewing the covenant, the Lord, Moses does the same thing. I put before you life and a blessing, curse and death. Choose life. So he gives them the same choice as the Lord did in the garden. Why? Because Israel was going into the promised land. Israel was going to cross through the chaotic waters of the Jordan, and then they're going to go into the promised land. And the promised land is Eden. The promised land is where Adam lived. The promised land is where the temple of God was, and that's the center of humanity. So what we're seeing are the parallels between the book of Genesis, which is a temple text, okay, and the book of Exodus, chapters 35 to 40. Sabbath becoming the highlight, the sign of the covenant, where the Lord will dwell. So, when we study the temple and you see the tabernacle and you see the cloud on Mount Sinai becomes the cosmic mountain. That Jerusalem is the mountain of God. That's where the connection between heaven and earth. And this is something we need to understand, that if you want to understand sacred spaces, you want to understand, holiness, you want to understand what the Creator requires of us, is that through the temple study, through the feasts, through the sacrificial or the offerings, it tells us the benevolence, the righteousness and justice, and everything that makes God who he is, the great benefactor, the patron, and how he trusts us as his people to take the word and become the gardeners of the kingdom, ambassadors of the kingdom, to give the good news to the nations that the Lord desires to dwell among us. All we need to do is to raise the name of the Lord and make it great by our actions, through righteousness and justice, so that his name will become renowned again, so that his name will never be shamed again. So this is just a short teaching about some of the things that I'm researching. And I have more information here that I don't have time today. I'm going to keep it short, because if not, I'm going to continue teach the whole night. And I want to pick your interest so that you will go into wisdomandtorah.com and listen to more information about new creation, Eden restored. We're going to talk about the Adam. We will understand Matthew 17 on my gospel cycle that is coming out tomorrow. I'll be recording it tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Talk about the transfiguration. What does that mean? And we're going to be covering a lot of these topics in here. So consider wisdomandtorah.com as a place of study and research. We want to focus on things that would edify the body, that will help us and get us to understand more about the plan of the Creator, to think that the Creator has called you so that you and I can become his ambassadors on the earth, the image, of the Lord, a new creation, for the purpose of sowing the seed of righteousness on the nations to become gardeners of the kingdom again, so that now all of humanity will be restored. And when all of humanity is restored, then the temple, the earth will take again. We will go back to Eden, and the earth again will welcome in the future the presence of God on the earth. He will Emmanuel with us again. And you are partakers, and you are intricate part of the master plan of the Creator. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and thank you guys for your time. I pray that this is edifying to you. Please share with your friends, as many as you can, so we can continue to promote the teachings. And by the way, next week is my birthday. So this was like 2 years ago. When I was 50, I looked like 22, felt like 20, like 18, but I act like 10. I guess I look like 24 now. I feel like 18 and act like 10. So keep me in your prayers, and the Lord is good, very good, and I will always bless his name, and may his name be exalted, praise and worship from all eternity by all mankind, because Adonai hu Elohim. Shalom, guys. Thank you.